Speaker is Chelsea Rivers. She is the mother of a disabled child and founder of the Blue Spot, which many of you may be familiar with on Facebook. She's a working mother who has fought for equality and fairness in respect of many social and environmental conditions, the most important of which has been the plight of the disabled. The founder of the Blue Spot, a campaign to bring awareness to the disabled in Cayman by calling out those who take advantage and park in the designated handicap or blue spots, Chelsea discovered a very public voice to help express the many frustrations of society's complacency in the face of disability. In her quest to make a difference in the lives of Cayman's less fortunate and mobility challenged, Chelsea has served as chairperson, member, and advisor to several boards, committees, and associations, including the Cayman Islands Human Rights Commission. By day, a senior public relations marketing manager for a large international law firm headquartered in Grand Cayman, she also runs a very successful horse riding company in West Bay with her husband and is the published author of Hurricane Ivan: The Experience. Chelsea manages all of this while being a devoted mother to her 3 children, one of whom is a differently abled twin. Today, she is going to talk about children with disabilities when hugs and Band-Aids are not enough. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chelsea Rivers.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Before we get started, let's warm up and have a little fun. Try to work off some of the lunch that we've just enjoyed. Can I get 3 volunteers? A volunteer? I'll volunteer my husband. Come on up. Which one am I pushing?
2 more. Dr. Yin, come on up. Dr. Yin and Robert Lewis. Robert, you come up too. I just voluntold 3 people.
Which one am I?
Forward.
Yeah, it's not going.
And the control is
That way. Got it. Okay. Okay. I'll just, if I can have you right at the front here. Okay, so this exercise is going to give you just a little insight into what some people go through that have disabilities. So if I can ask you to put one hand behind your back, and if I can ask you, Robert, to stand on one foot. Okay. What I would like you to do is attempt to carry out this task with one hand. So you're going to open a banana. It's organic. If you want to eat it, it's completely fine. Open a banana with one hand and eat. You're going to open the jar with one hand. And Robert, you're going to deliver those papers to various people throughout this room. 1 foot and one hand. Anytime you're ready, go for it.
You did it.
All right, thank you. Is it coming together? Okay, the banana's a little mashed up, but I'm sure you could eat it. The jar is undone, not too bad. Well done. Thank you. Just poured everything out. Robert, how's it going over there? All right. Yay, give him a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. So that was fun to watch, right? It's okay, you can laugh. Sometimes things that are kind of sad are kind of funny. It's interesting to watch people's reactions when they don't understand that somebody's way of doing something is completely related to their inability to do it the way that we expect them to be doing it. So that was just a moment's inconvenience, but for many people, they struggle with challenges. For us, are very simple tasks, much greater than figuring out how to eat a banana with one hand. So let's try one more. How many people in this room have blue eyes? Raise your hands. Okay. Can all the blue-eyed people shut your eyes? If you have to shut them, keep them shut with your hands, turn around, whatever you do, don't open them. Whatever you hear, don't open them. Try to keep your eyes closed. The rest of the audience, I'm asking you to look forward And let's move on to the next exercise that it involves other people who are disabled that may be blind. No. Okay. Blue-eyed people, keep your eyes closed.
Isn't that adorable?
I know, right? Okay, my blue-eyed people, you can open your eyes. Anyone want to volunteer very quickly for how that felt? Not to know what was going on around you, not to have a visual, to hear people around you that were enjoying something that you weren't a part of? Anybody? Sorry? You felt like you're missing out. Yeah, it wasn't nice. You weren't being included. Yeah, and everybody else was having a good time. I'd love to show you what they were watching, but that wouldn't be fair to them. So in both of those experiences, we presented people with limitations. The experience was brief, but I'm sure that those who participated will agree that it was kind of frustrating. I want you to hold on to that experience as we continue. I'm going to take us away from the well-beaten path today. You've likely been attending sessions between yesterday and today where you've been given very technical and medical information. You've no doubt been given a plethora of stats and figures and more information than you can probably process at the minute. But today we're going to get a little personal. I want to share some experiences and work out some grievances here today, my therapy, and maybe yours, I've had with raising a disabled from childhood to adulthood and everything in between. That well-beaten path is lined with beautiful scenery, as is the norm for frequently traveled areas. There have been some interesting figurative sights throughout the last few days, lots of pretty flowers, lots of shade-providing trees. Everything can be kind of wrapped into a nice box. It's easy and palatable to absorb. But my purpose here today is to detour us all a little deeper into the woods, as it were. The not-so-pretty areas of the path we all walk back and forth on a daily basis, not appreciating that there's a whole other world just on the periphery, kind of kept out of sight by those lush hedges and that healthy foliage. So come walk with me for a little while, if you will, onto a less traveled path, lined with weeds and prickly bush. We may encounter maiden plum and cowitch, and for those visitors from overseas, that would probably be the equivalent to poison ivy or poison oak. If you're careful, none of this will affect you at all. But if you're careless, and I hope you are, you may be itching for quite a while after, the cure for which may be your own conscience and attitude. I need to take you a bit off track today, just for a little while, I promise. Out of your comfort zone, I assure you I'll return you safely, maybe a little bruised, maybe a little scratched, but you will be back to that familiar and safe beaten path once again. What you choose to do when you are returned will entirely be up to you. So lace up your sneakers and join me as we tour the path less traveled. So disability affects us all, one way or the other, whether it's due to our own personal situation, perhaps someone in our family, our parents, our brothers, sisters, or even changes to society as a result of evolving social acceptances and legislature which, over the decades, have pulled back the veil on the lives of the disabled. Now more than ever before, we are integrated with persons with limitations, and our own healthy lives have been impacted as society tries to accommodate and structure around them. We're impacted by parking spaces, bathroom stalls, push-button doors, ramps. But are we fully embracing their needs? Have we done everything we can to ensure that persons with limited mobility, even sight and hearing, can live normal lives amongst us? So let's take it back to the very beginning. Raising a Disabled Child, Chapter 1. As the mother of a disabled or differently abled child, I can tell you that the system has not been engineered to handle variations of the needs of a child with limitations. I cannot say that I have even felt that I'm personally doing it right, parenting a child with special needs, albeit his circumstances are somewhat unique to this island. So finding a healthcare provider who understands his needs and could guide me was a challenge in the beginning. Ultimately, I had to find doctors who just had good bedside manner that he could relate to, that he felt comfortable with, and together we all learned what he needed, how he needed it, when to step in, what to do. It has been a frustrating experience. It has been a very scary experience. That life of that child has been my responsibility, my husband's responsibility, my family's responsibility. I'm so afraid that I will fail, always. And for a parent of a special needs child, failure is often a life or death matter. My family and I, and others like me, have become experts on our children's diseases and disabilities. We have become doctors, psychiatrists, teachers, mind readers, authorities on the different meanings between moans, groans, and grunts. Believe me when I tell you that it's quite the accomplishment, but the success is personal. There are no awards, no medals, no degrees for what we do on a daily basis, on a nightly basis, on a weekly, on a monthly, on a yearly basis. After 19 years, I want you to understand that we, my family and I, have come this far by sheer determination, but mostly luck. And this is as much an indictment on the medical institution as it is on the government, as it is on society, as it is on me. Without a galvanized set of policies and oversight, children with disabilities fly under the radar, and everyone assumes that everything is hunky-dory. But it isn't, most often. We may be somewhat removed from the days of hiding our disabled in the back room, never allowing society to see them. But we're still quite a ways off from conditioning our country to fully embrace them as humans and equipping our infrastructure with the necessary adjustments to allow them to enjoy life with the same accessibility as everyone else. My son, born with a degenerative disease called Duchenne muscular dystrophy, did not have special needs at birth. He was perfect. His issues developed as he got older. This is a chapter that began pretty smoothly for us, but that's not always the case. Many parents face a lifetime of challenge from those first moments of life. What should be the most joyous and amazing experience, with hopes and dreams culminating in that first gasp of air, that first tiny little cry, are dashed away for parents who give life to children with immediate and obvious disabilities. Who has ever prepared for this life-changing event? How do you prepare yourself from the unknown when the unknown is so unknown? There are never enough how-to books and support groups that can truly get one through the toughest times in life when you have absolutely no control over your child's well-being. I ate everything right. I exercised. I went to my doctor's appointments religiously. I did everything I was told to do. I should have had a perfect, healthy, normal child, and I didn't. It was not my fault. It's not the doctor's fault. It was a genetic thing. I had no control. Giving birth to a child that will be considered disabled at some point is often one of the most heartbreaking situations any parent will ever face. But that is just the beginning. For disabled children, there can be such a barrier between them and normal interactions with their peers. One of the worst things for a child is to be different. Children are so unforgiving and uncensored. They have not learned the subtle nuances of discretion and often tease, mock, or stare at the peers who display odd behaviors or look, sound, or appear differently from what they consider normal, what society teaches them is normal. During the childhood of a disabled child, there are so many changes to their condition and adjustments to be made. This must happen, of course, in addition to the awkwardness of maturing and becoming self-aware, as if that isn't enough. Can you fathom the pressures that children face as they develop into young adults, watching their peers enjoy the rites of passage that they themselves may never experience? I watch it firsthand every day. A parent wants normal childhood experiences for their child, free from drama, free from trauma. Unfortunately, we're put in a position where we have to defend, explain, and often wipe away tears. But hugs and kisses are not enough. Band-aids are not enough. We long for a cure-all. We would trade our own health and the well-being of our child, of ourselves, to take on the ills of our child, just so that they could be normal, healthy, perfect. I encountered a situation when my son was a child. Brandon's disease was progressing more noticeably, and his balance was severely compromised by this stage. He was still walking. The weakening of his muscles meant that he would collapse at the slightest offset. Well, the school bully picked up on this pretty quickly. So Brandon became a target because he thought it would be funny to creep up on Brandon or lay weight him around a corner and tip him, stick out his foot, trip him, bump into him, because that's all it took for Brandon to collapse like a ton of bricks. And then they would laugh and laugh and laugh because it was so funny to see a child fall down. Pretty cruel, huh? Sensitivity. A lack of sensitivity training in school. A failure on the part of who? Me? The teachers? The school? The parents of that little bully? Until we implement programs that address situations like this, until we as parents sit our children down and explain how to treat people, unless society recognizes that being disabled is not a reason to shun or ostracize, we can never hope to claim success on efforts to integrate them into our society, into our world, which is actually their world. Buildings and accessories are not enough. They're great, we need them, obviously, but there's more to it than that for a disabled person. We must start from the earliest days and condition our own children on the fundamentals of inclusivity and acceptance. Teach them how to view disabled peers as equals and develop a blindness to differences and limitations. When my son first began to demonstrate his limitations, it was suggested that he be transferred to the Lighthouse School. For those of you who don't know, this is a specialized school for disabled children. However, it's more specifically designed for disabled children with cognitive disabilities, and Brandon's cognitive skills are very finely tuned. He thinks he's smarter than me. While the Lighthouse School is completely purpose-built for accessibility, which would be amazing for him, it would not have been able to provide him with the education that he needed and deserved. Not that it would have been the school's fault, it simply wasn't the right fit for Brandon's situation. He needed to be in mainstream education, with a few tweaks here and there to adjust the school to meet his needs, not the other way around. But that was and remains the mindset of society. If someone is deemed not normal, then they must find another box. We had our challenges with accessible schools. The government school system was simply not prepared to accommodate a child in a wheelchair. So we had to look at private schools. Well, here we are with a disabled child whose medical needs are becoming increasingly more expensive as he gets older. And I have twins. Brandon has a twin, a perfectly healthy ox of a twin. So double whatever school fees we're now facing and anything that goes with it. And one of those twins, not Brandon, but his other brother, eats like an ox. So our lunch bill alone was 3 children in those 2. Now I must put both of them into private schooling because I can't put one into government schooling and one into private schooling because of accessible issues. So into private schooling they go. We searched within our means and were disappointed with what we found, where some options were simply not within our reach because of accessibility issues. Ultimately, we chose CCC School, and let me tell you, they bent over backwards to ensure that Brandon's school experiences were as normal and accommodating as possible. And yesterday, they celebrated their 75th anniversary, still going strong. At one point, he was even allowed to do his homework or his schoolwork on an iPad or an iPhone, as writing had become too cumbersome for his condition, and they had a very strict no phones policy in school, but they allowed him. For his graduation, where all of the students needed to be on the stage at the Family Life Center, not accessible, by the way, they engaged with Mr. Parker Tibbetts, who built a customized ramp at his own expense so that Brandon could join his peers on stage. And receive his high school diploma with everyone else, like everyone else. And they all took the same route that he took. That night was so emotional for everyone in the room, not just me. So university has always been looming for Brandon, with a huge question mark on what are we going to do. He wants to go, he has the brain to go, he's so intelligent, he wants to program things, he wants to invent apps, he wants to he's an Apple freak, he knows everything there is to know. But where would he be able to go? Would he be able to go alone? Are we sending him overseas? As we got closer to the time when he would have had to make that decision, we all got cold feet, and all plans were halted. and all discussions. We just couldn't do it. We're aware that most major US universities have gone to great lengths to accommodate disabled students, from having a companion attend classes and assist with note-taking to having someone in the dorms to assist with general needs. Any gaps would easily be filled by the US government in the form of medical personnel who would visit and provide the necessary care through government assistance. We would obviously have to hire someone to do everything else, but we could make it work. We could make it work. But could we do it? No, heck no, not in a million years, no. I was not letting him go, no. And I have struggled with that decision. I want Brandon to have an awesome life. I want him to have an awesome college experience. I want him to see the world. I even sent him to Panama without me once with our helper, and he loved it. He got to go, but I can't do this. I'm his mother, and I'm terrified that the minute he is out of my reach, the minute that I am not there, at the second that he calls my name, something's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. He will need me, and I won't be there. Other people will never give him the same care that his mother will give him. And sometimes I ignore him, and sometimes I tell him, give me 5 minutes, not right now, I'm very busy. I mean, he's a child. I try to make him feel like a normal child, so if I was there at every beck and call, then he's going to take full advantage, trust me. They always do, the minute I sit down. But his life would be ruined if I let him go. So I shifted my focus closer to home. Cayman has 2 local colleges. Surely he would gain something from this. Alas, accessibility issues immediately presented themselves for one, the closest one to us, of course, and the distance to travel to the other was a bit prohibitive, so we abandoned that situation. Of course, we still would have to consider how to make this work, as Cayman unfortunately doesn't have the same assistance programs that the US universities have, so we would have had to figure out who would sit with him to take notes, help him move between the classes, etc. Clearly, we've made no progress on this front, as Brandon is not yet enrolled anywhere, has spent his days cooped up at home, telling me he's going crazy, having graduated in 2015 from high school. That said, I am pleased to report that last week the Cayman Islands government unanimously passed the Disabilities Bill, which promises to address, definitely, it promises to address a number of areas affecting disabled, including education. The right to an education is constitutional, and this comes from the disabilities policy that was put together by a number of people in this room. By educating persons with disabilities in the most appropriate, inclusive setting, their place in society is being solidified. And this ensures that they will have the equal opportunities, as many equal opportunities as those without disabilities. When persons with disabilities receive a quality education, they are better equipped to live independently, be more productive members of society. Having access to lifelong learning will help persons with disabilities reach their full potential, having a feeling of accomplishment and a sense of security in their own future, having control in their own future. Changes are needed, and it's not just to the physical buildings, but within teacher training, educational training programs, legislation, and more importantly, the public's mindset. While some progress has been made towards ensuring persons with disabilities have a quality education and enjoy lifelong learning, there is more to do in order to achieve quality education for all and ensure access to lifelong learning for our citizens with disabilities. So now Brandon is 19, a proper adult. He expects to be treated as an adult, and he wants us to let him make adult decisions because his twin, who is also 19, funny how that works, and I'm sorry to say, is off making adult decisions that are not always the right ones. This irritates Brandon, who is very pragmatic, he's very responsible, but he's confined to a wheelchair, so we treat him differently, whereas his twin, who Brandon considers probably mentally disabled, is out doing whatever he wants. I told you, man, his brain is just... He's dependent on a number of people for the most basic needs. It's not fair. He would rock adulthood if we let him. And we try, but he has so many needs that it makes it difficult for us to view him as an adult. His body is frail and childlike compared to his brothers. He requires so much attention and care. Even though he tells you he's fine, he can do whatever he wants to do, leave him alone. Other than a very mature brain with deep thoughts and really radical ideas, which can clearly articulate and convey with the sharpest intelligence and wit, I still treat him like a child, and I shouldn't. It's humiliating, it's demoralizing, but it's a necessary part of his life. Caring for a disabled adult is actually more difficult, in my opinion, besides the obvious changes to his physical being. He's taller, he's heavier, he's more manly. There's also a mental change to his condition, to his surroundings. He's more demanding, he's more forceful, he's more intolerant of delays and failures. I know he's frustrated, and I know he often vocalizes his aggravation at his situation because he needs to rely on everyone around him, and he just wants to get on with adulting. We also contend with depression, which was not an issue through his childhood. And it's difficult for a caregiver who has been involved since the earliest stages of his disability to adapt to the changes that go with maturing into adulthood. He would like more independence, but that's not something that I'm willing to allow. He feels that he should be able to stay home alone for hours, and I imagine every conceivable disaster that could happen in the first 5 minutes. My house has burned down so many times in my head when I've had to run just to the car or just down the road to the mailbox. He could be dropped off at the movies, at a restaurant with friends, but we struggle with accessibility, something going wrong, his friends not knowing what to do, and all of the what-ifs you can imagine. Because of our fears, he's now developed his own fears, very irrational fears. Some are realistic, others are simply based on the limitations of accessibility, which have reduced his world to a very small bubble. Opportunity is not something that one associates with disabled persons. Persons with disabilities are entitled to the highest level of independence possible and full inclusion in society so that they can enjoy their full rights and a significantly improved quality of life for them and their family. Through independence and inclusion, persons with disabilities will not only have more opportunities to participate and become actively involved in their community, but they will also benefit from improved access to a range of goods and services, support networks, and information. I think I missed a slide. Currently, with regards to their independence and social inclusion, persons with disabilities face many challenges, such as discrimination and stigmatization. Say that 10 times fast. Stigmatization, thank you. Maneuvering around the built environment, the physical environment alone, can present significant obstacles and increase, and for example, with inaccessible buildings, public spaces, and public transportation. Further, persons with disabilities have limited opportunities to participate in, there we go, culture, recreational activities, sporting and recreational activities. I'll get it back on track in a minute. Prospects, therefore, must be expanded in order to engage them in national and community activities. An additional significant obstacle to independence and inclusion is a lack of materials and information in accessible formats for people with disabilities. Consequently, a greater effort is needed to be made to make these materials and information accessible in places such as schools, libraries, and public offices. There's the recreational. For persons with disabilities seeking employment, the first challenge is to convince employers to consider them for hiring. Employers may shy away from hiring persons with disabilities, assuming that they either lack the skills or training needed to do the job, or that expensive accommodations for employees with disabilities will affect the profitability of that business. Moreover, once employment is secured, it's often difficult to ensure that persons with disabilities are treated in a fair and equitable way in regards to pay and benefits. We need to secure the possibility that persons with disabilities are provided with the necessary training that enables them to secure jobs and fair wages. We tried to figure out an employment situation for Brandon, but it didn't quite pan out. In addition to the accessibility issue, which continues to plague the disabled, many special needs adults require constant care and attention. While Brandon can be considered a high-functioning disabled adult, his physical limitations require someone to be with him at all times, just for the basic processes and tasks, like taking a sip of water. Employment opportunities are not overflowing for people like him, and while intentions are always good, sometimes we just can't seem to find the right fit for someone like Brandon to completely integrate as a viable and contributing member of society. Okay, how's everybody doing so far? Path less traveled is okay? Not too badly damaged? Anyone need a Band-Aid? Let's look at everything in between. There's your Band-Aid. Just like a healthy person, even more than a healthy person, disabled persons must have access to the highest standards of health care to meet their diverse needs. Oh, and can we please make it affordable? Brandon's healthcare requirements have increased exponentially over the years. As his health has deteriorated, we've experienced a spike in costs for medical checkups and medications. Locally, no one was fully up to speed on what those needs were in the beginning. It was very much a learning process for all around. Unfortunately, government services were just not equipped to manage his particular set of needs, so we were once again forced to seek private service providers, and that's not cheap. Brandon's particular condition requires a schedule of monitoring his heart and lung functions, receiving regular physiotherapy, and recently a complete spinal fusion to halt the progression of scoliosis. We'll get to insurance in a minute, but let me interject here. They don't cover everything. I don't know if you knew that. It's therefore necessary to reduce barriers to accessing health care due to costs, availability of services, inadequate skills, knowledge of healthcare providers and practitioners, and the availability of trained personnel. I can tell you as a parent of a disabled child, by the time you add up all of the ongoing and one-off costs, just to keep your child in school, fed, clothed, you have very little fight left in you when you're hit with a medical bill for routine treatments that are necessary on a regular basis. Then try to imagine an emergency situation, which are the most common for persons with disabilities. I wonder sometimes how families with single parents or one working parent actually cope. Healthcare is an area that has worried me for years. Most parents of disabled children are simply trying to make it through the day by day, through our situation, with the stress and responsibilities weighing on our shoulders. Unless there's an immediate medical need, such as an unrelated sickness, it's up to us to determine our child's wellness checks and follow-ups. To my knowledge, and based on my own personal experience, there's no oversight for children who have medical issues or disabilities. And by that I mean that from the day that Brandon was diagnosed, I have never been contacted to ensure that I'm adequately covering his healthcare needs. There is no register that he can be logged onto and no program that monitors his well-being. Fortunately for Brandon, I'm a mama bear, so I have this dogmatic approach to making sure that I put him in every waiting room of any doctor that could possibly sort him, fix him, help him. I've done this in Cayman, I've done it in the US, we even took him to Cuba for a month. I've researched his condition. I have him on supplements, on vitamins, on natural extracts meant to lessen his symptoms, increase his lifespan, improve his quality of life. But that's just me. What about parents who are burdened by their disabled child, but have no time, no resources to care properly or adequately for their babies? What about those children? Who's looking out for them? We need to consider a national health policy, not just talk about one. We need a registry and enforcement on keeping track of children born in the Cayman Islands who need an advocate and a protector. On the point of healthcare professionals and providers, I will share the dark side of an incident that happened many years ago. Brandon began to need preventative physio care to nip some issues in the bud that we knew eventually would create issues for him later down the line. So I reached out to the hospital's physio department to begin weekly sessions. It proved to be a bit cumbersome because he was in school in West Bay at the time, so we'd have to figure out the commute 2 or 3 times a week after school that fit into a schedule. A few months into that, I was tipped that there was a private practitioner who made house calls, so obviously that was something that I needed. I sought her out, and I made the arrangements for her to come to our house once a week, just as a start. I was shortly informed that the head of the hospital's physio department had issued me an ultimatum, that if I continued to allow that physiotherapist, to treat my son, the public hospital would refuse him service. Imagine my surprise and horror and anger as a parent of a disabled child, at this ultimatum. My son's needs and care were not the priority here. Needless to say, he never returned to the hospital for physio after that, and we increased the number of weekly visits with the private physiotherapist who made the trip to West Bay every week and treated him in the comfort of his own home. Sensitivity, eh? My experience with insurance coverage for Brandon has been one of the most challenging, frustrating, heartbreaking, debilitating, demoralizing, mind-boggling, fearful, inexplicable, complicated, overwhelming. I think you get the idea. Currently, the Health Insurance Law 2013 requires that every resident must have health insurance. In addition, the law mandates a standard health insurance contract called SHIC, which is the minimum coverage that must be provided to the insured by all approved insurance providers. I can't say for certain, I can stand to be corrected, but I'm pretty sure that the SHIC would be of little comfort to someone with Brandon's medical needs, just knowing what I have experienced with the cost of things. The law also includes the definition of a dependent offspring in relation to an insured person. This definition captures all persons, abled and disabled, who are 18 years and over and are unable to access health insurance coverage due to medical or physical reasons. Unfortunately, enforcement of the law lacks the required personnel to ensure full compliance by employers and health insurance providers, I'm told. In addition, services such as speech and occupational therapy are covered only where medically necessary, and therefore, in many instances, are left to the discretion of the insurance provider rather than the healthcare practitioner who's actually physically seeing our children. I must frequently request a letter from Brandon's primary healthcare practitioner, repeating my child's permanent, lifelong, forever need of such services as physiotherapy every year. So let me briefly enlighten you on one of the wonderful experiences I've had in this area. Brandon wasn't always disabled. He appeared healthy for many years, was not diagnosed until he was 6. I knew something was wrong, but I just couldn't find a doctor to figure it out for me and put a label on it. His healthcare needs began when he was around 11, when he needed to start using a wheelchair. I had insurance through my employer at the time, so that covered my family. And back in those days, pre-existing conditions were everyone's nightmare. But he wasn't pre-existing because he wasn't diagnosed until years after I had already started as a client of that insurance company. So as you do, I decided one day it was time for me to elevate my employment opportunity and leave the employer that I was currently with for a different opportunity elsewhere. I knew I needed to have all of my ducks in a row, primarily because of Brandon. I knew I was under their insurance coverage, pre-existing conditions being what they were. I needed to make sure that everything was secure, or I would still be working there to this day, forever and ever, amen. And I loved it, it wasn't a bad job, but I would still be there to this day if I didn't sort things out for Brandon. So I contacted the local agent to advise them of my intentions and request that my insurance policy be transferred from my employer to me, and I will pay personally every penny of it as a private policy. The agent advised me it was not a problem. I have it in writing. We commenced the paperwork. I accepted the new job offer. I resigned from my job. I was gone. About a week after I physically walked out of my last job, before I started my new job, I was contacted by the insurance company directly, informing me that Brandon had a pre-existing condition, would need to undergo a medical evaluation. The insurance company would not be covering anything related to this condition called muscular dystrophy because it was pre-existing. Another blow. I fought so hard for days. And I wasn't even on island. My grandmother had just undergone a mastectomy. I was with her, fighting for my child and hoping that she would survive. I was angry, I was resolute, I was adamant. I was not going to let them get away with this. I would not fail him. In the end, they put me on to the regional head, and I explained my story all over again. I did everything right. I would have never left my job. I asked, I was given the approval. And I was told that that agent didn't have the right to speak on behalf of the insurance company, even though they had the right to take my money and the right to ensure that everything that I needed was in correct order or wasn't. He was not considered a new client, in my opinion, as they were claiming. He was diagnosed while on their plan and coverage. His name was in their system for years. They could look at the pages and pages and pages and pages of doctors and medications and everything that we had done that they had helped me with. The regional head heard me. He sympathized with me. I knew he really wanted to do what he could do, but his hands were tied. As in their records, my former employer was their client, and now that I owned the policy, I was considered a new client. He finally convinced the underwriters to cover expenses relating to Brandon's condition up to US $100,000 for the year, with I think the maximum was $1 million or something in his lifetime. I needed more. I knew the day would come when Brandon's healthcare needs would exceed that in a year and in a lifetime, but I was so tired of the fight, and as parents of disabled children will tell you, that tiredness reaches a limit that the average mortal cannot bear. I was exhausted by this stage, so I conceded. I paid the monthly premium, which rose every single year. By the time I left that insurance company, I was forking over $2,212 CI dollars a month to make sure that my child had $100,000 a year at his disposal at their discretion, because they still have the 20% and they still have things that they wouldn't cover, just to make sure he had coverage, mandatory coverage. Yes. Oh, and then there was that one time he had to have spinal surgery when the hospital informed me a week before we were supposed to fly out that his portion was $250,000. I left the insurance company that week. I got another one through my current employer, and they covered it 100%. Before we got to that stage, though, my family took to GoFundMe and raised so much money to try and get us through that situation, and I ended up giving it all back or paying it forward because I just couldn't, there was no way. Accessories become a very natural part of life at one point or another. For many families, it begins at birth. For others, like mine, it's a gradual need that becomes quite a monster. It's never ending, and children are constantly growing. So you'll find yourself with several sizes of the same equipment as they get older. So we've been through 4 wheelchairs, 2 of which are manual, 2 are motorized, and those babies are expensive. His first ones were covered through private donations at the Lighthouse School's Wheelchair for Kids program. His current one is a collaboration between us and his new insurance company. I think it ran about $13,000 at the time, and our portion was not that far off from that figure. He has outgrown 3 sets of leg braces. They have to be custom built. It takes quite a few weeks. They bring someone in, they do the measurements, she goes away, she builds them, she sends them back. So between the fitting and the measuring and then the wearing can take a while. So insurance didn't want to cover that at first, and the last set I think was about $4,000. We have replaced 3 bath chairs, and his bed is a state-of-the-art contraption that sits up, lays down, bends, contours, and massages, and I think that one cost about $3,000. He has a stander, which helps him to be upright for a little while each day because he spends most of his days sitting. It's quite a torture machine. He hates it, but he's taller than me when he stands in it, which is pretty cool. He has graduated from a CPAP to a BiPAP, which is not a good thing. It's a breathing machine. He uses it at night. He doesn't need it yet to breathe for him. He just needs it at night to keep him breathing and expand his lungs. He visits the pulmonologist every 6 months to test that one out. When we travel, we're quite the spectacle. Suitcases filled with medical contraptions, including his bath seat, because you just can't trust the accessible hotel will have a bath seat when you get there. So I've actually had to purchase an additional 2 bath seats, which are different places in the US, because we didn't know we needed one. However, our most expensive piece of equipment, designed and engineered to accommodate Brandon's condition, is his vehicle. A bright red, not that color, Chrysler Town & Country, which we promptly bought brand new and then had completely gutted and converted into a fully accessible vehicle for him. That one ran us about $60,000. They don't cover that with insurance. Thank goodness for good credit and a bank loan. The downside is that no one on island really knows how to maintain the equipment that they put into that machine that helps him. So his has been broken for a few years. And we kind of have to rig it whenever we need to get him in and out of the van because nobody can figure out how to fix it. And they've been on phone calls with the people who made it and still can't figure it out. Challenges faced by persons with disabilities in the current law are that the SHIC plan doesn't cover assistive devices that may be required for people with disabilities. So that means the bulk of the cost is borne by the families. Have you been keeping score of all of this? Because I lost track years ago. We just pay whatever we need to pay to keep Brandon alive and healthy-ish. The majority of equipment is so specialty that it must come from overseas. So we either go there or they come here, but either way, somebody is footing that bill. The waiting is brutal, and the fear that something breaking is very real, knowing that repairs may need to actually go back. His bed was broken for months and months and months. We finally got it sorted partly, and then last night my husband pulled one piece off and said, well, this is done. So we need to figure that one out this weekend. Don't get me started on where we have to store all of this stuff, because we have to. The first step to success is access. Where do I even begin with this constant and seemingly unresolved issue? I will admit many improvements over the years in terms of efforts to accessibility have been made, but if you actually find an accessible parking space, it might be occupied by a perfectly able-bodied driver, hence the blue spot name and shame. If it's empty, it might just not be an accessible spot, but a regular spot that they thought painting blue was actually going to be a good idea and help us out. It's just a regular parking space. We have a side load van that you saw in the other photo. I can't pull into a parking space and side load Brandon because of another car being there. So I've become very daring and vocal and challenging and confrontational over the years. And I take up 2 spaces and I want them to come and say something to me. I'm dying for it, but nobody does. As soon as I can see them coming. As soon as that ramp goes down, they're like, okay, yeah, we're not gonna, You may find a parking space without an issue. So it may be unoccupied, it may be the right size. Then you get your kid out, and there's no ramp to get you on the sidewalk. You may find that ramp to a sidewalk somewhere, but then to get inside the door of the establishment, there's this riser, so you can't get him in. You may get in the door without a hassle, but then the doorways may be too narrow for him to get through the building inside. You may get through the doorways, but some of the areas are upstairs that we need to go to, and there's no elevator. So you see, while planning may require buildings to be accessible by certain codes and standards, there's a little to no concern on retrofitting older buildings, which we have, obviously, to accommodate the need. There's often no oversight or enforcement post-grant of certificate of occupation to ensure that the accessibility features, such as a parking sign and fresh paint, are maintained. Accessibility issues are not limited to moving in and out of buildings, though. The hospitals, believe it or not, are ill-equipped to address specific needs of disabled persons due to outdated equipment designed to accommodate more able-bodied individuals. On occasion, Brandon has to get x-rays. He's frail. It's one of the most excruciating processes for him, and he hates it. And he begs us to find another way every time it has to happen, and there's nothing we can do. And we try to talk to the people that are going to be doing the x-ray, but they have a job to do, and they've got a line up, and there's just nothing we can do. So he's forced to lie on a hard table, contorting his very inflexible and sensitive body to suit the technicians, rather than find a way to achieve the same results with equipment that is specifically engineered to work with his limitations. Banks are also not designed to service customers who can't reach the teller. If you're in a wheelchair, those tellers are way out of reach. And it's a very awkward interaction to watch them have to do their business, their banking business, on the floor where there's no privacy, no discretion. It's kind of embarrassing. I'm also very disappointed to see that the new plans for the airport renovations do not include covered jetways to the planes. This is most concerning as Brandon's wheelchair is motorized, so it's not designed to function when it's soaking wet. He must relinquish his chair at the plane's door in the open elements and have it taken back down under the airplane to be loaded for travel, whatever the weather is, and that's not an ideal situation for us. There are so many areas that those traveling the well-lit foliage blind path don't see, but we see it. Oftentimes, we're just too exhausted to say anything. and we concede defeat or just find another way around it. Yep. So what happens now? Where do we go from here? Well, for you, this is the end of the path less traveled today. We've returned to that familiar pathway, lined with happiness and sunshine. Be sure to brush off the burrs and the prickles that you might have picked up along this journey. I have a few miles left on the path, myself, so we're going to part ways here. Be sure to close the gate behind you, because we wouldn't want anyone stumbling onto our path over here without a qualified guide to help them along the way. Come on. Okay, got it. Thank you for taking this walk with me.
Okay. Well, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Oh my goodness. Small token. Wow. Well, I need a couple minutes to recover. Our next speaker is actually at 2:10, so we have a couple of minutes. Don't go anywhere, because it won't be long before we're back. But just please join me again in thanking Chelsea for sharing her story with us.